Hello, I'm Mike Demlong. I'm a wildlife education program manager here at Arizona Game and Fish, and my partner and I, Eric Proctor, have put this little presentation on for you today. Today what we're calling this is our Wildlife Management Career Exploration Panel, and today you're going to hear from department employees who are both biologists and they're passionate in their efforts to conserve, protect, and manage wildlife throughout the state of Arizona. So, I just need to take a moment to thank these folks. We have, obviously it's Saturday, it's a weekend, it's a holiday weekend, and these folks came in on a Saturday morning to do this, so I really, really appreciate their efforts. Yes, thank you very much. So, on behalf of the citizens of Arizona, Arizona Game and Fish Department is a steward responsible for the management for up to 1,000 species and native species in the state of Arizona. That's a pretty awesome responsibility. To be effective at managing and conserving these species, and to be requires a large staff of biologists. The department has about 650 employees. About a little more than half of those employees are biologists, which require you obviously to get a degree in life sciences and before you can work with those. And you also have to have a very good understanding of the scientific method and, of course, have good communication skills. So those are some important things to remember. Please note that although all of our panel members today from the department, all the panel members you hear from today work for the department, jobs similar to theirs exist in other, what I call, spheres of employment. For example, you could work with government agencies as a biologist, you could work in private industry, you could work for a nonprofit or what they call a non-governmental organization, and of course there's jobs for biologists in academia. Some of those require even more education, but it's something to remember. So, but early in your career planning, whether you're in high school or grade school or you're a college undergraduate, you should start looking into these spheres of employment and ask yourself, where am I most interested in working? Am I most interested in working for Arizona Game and Fish, Fish and Wildlife Service, as a private consultant, with wildlife, with the World Wildlife Fund, with the Phoenix Zoo, wherever it might be? But you need to start asking yourself those questions very early in your career and start to do some investigation. Remember, going to school and getting a degree is just one part of your educational experience. To go along with that, you should be also looking for volunteer opportunities, internships, job shadowing, anything you can do to gain experience to get a better understanding of the future position you might hold. So how's this session going to work this morning? Just real quickly, we have 5 presenters. Each will present for 10 minutes, approximately, plus or minus. We're not going to smack them and say, no, you can't do 11 or 12. So each of the panelists will give approximately 10 minutes. They'll give a little presentation. They'll talk about their different roles and responsibilities in managing wildlife in the state of Arizona. And once they're done, we have some questions, some common questions that were submitted to us during the registration process, and we're going to ask those questions of the panelists. So that'll take another 15 minutes. Once we're done with the question and answer period, then our panelists will break and they'll go to different stations, both in the lobby here and out where you walk through, and they'll be there to answer your individual questions. So if you want to know, what color shirt do I have to wear on Tuesdays, you could ask them that. That'd be a silly question to ask, obviously, but you could ask it. How many degrees, how long is my internship once I graduate, or do I have to live in the state of Arizona? Whatever your questions will be, they'll be able to answer those. So they'll be out there until 11 o'clock. So from approximately 10:15, 11 o'clock, they'll be stationed in tables throughout. Just a real quick review of who you can speak to after our session today. Right up front here, we'll have 2 wonderful ladies, Brisa and Milani from our Human Resources Department. They can answer questions about what degrees are required to get a job with Arizona Game and Fish. We actually have an internship program if you're in college. They can answer a lot of those general questions. In the back, we'll have someone from Scottsdale Community College. It's Russ, and Russ can answer questions about their program at Scottsdale Community College and other community college. I'm actually going to represent ASU because I have a dual job. My name badge on one side says Arizona Game and Fish, and on the back side it shows my picture at the best university in the state, which is ASU. Yes, thank you. So I'll be there speaking about ASU. If you want questions about U of A, you'll have to go to Tucson. Just kidding. So, and finally, out in the main lobby there, I believe we have Rich is here from Antelope Foundation and Adobe Mountain. If you're interested in volunteer opportunities, we have there's a person here, Rich. He'll be talking about volunteer opportunities with the Arizona Antelope Foundation. We'll have someone here to talk about volunteer opportunities with the Adobe Mountain Wildlife Center. We'll also have the 5 panelists in another room here, so you can ask the wildlife manager, you can ask scientists, you can ask our vet. They'll be all in this other room. And I didn't mean not to say their names, because I'm going to introduce you, so I thought instead of saying it twice. Okay, so that's enough of me. You don't want to hear any more from me. So now we're going to go to our 5 panelists. And first I'd like to introduce our first speaker is Mark Stewart. And Mark has been with the department for 22 and a half years. It's a long time. And Mark is a game ranger. He just recently got a promotion. Congratulations on that. And I've actually worked with Mark on a couple of occasions. He's a great guy. So, Mark, it's all yours now. Thank you. Great.
Okay, thanks for having me. I, too, am an ASU alum because I could read when I started college. Just kidding. I can't read still. Okay, so yeah, I did get a promotion, but I spent the majority of my career with the Game and Fish Department as a wildlife manager. There's a little bit of background stuff on what it takes to become what I am. A bachelor's degree in wildlife science, basically. I went to ASU, but U of A and NAU both offer those, as well as many other places locally here in Arizona and abroad. Basically, 4 years of education took me about 5.5, because I'm a little bit slow. My major was in wildlife management, specifically. The other stuff probably isn't important. Common questions that I get: what time do I report to work? How many hours do I work per day? That's the really unique thing about being a wildlife manager. You kind of get to set your own schedule. There's an expectation that you're working when it's important to work, but it doesn't matter what day, it doesn't matter what time. You can start at 4 in the morning and work until 9 at night if you want. Work just 3 days a week. 40 hours a week is a limitation, but you can accrue comp time if the job requires that you work beyond 40 hours a week. Salary is probably one of the low lights, but it has improved over the course of my career. You can see the salary range there for wildlife managers. And maybe the best feature of the job is just the freedom. The freedom to do something that you absolutely love to do. Spend time with wildlife and spend time in the great outdoors. Probably some of the most challenging things as a wildlife manager are the human-wildlife conflicts. I've had everything from mountain lions in people's backyards, or bears tearing up people's garbage, to woodpeckers pecking on someone's eaves that they were upset about. And you get to be the person that solves most of those kinds of issues. As you can see, I look like a cop, right? Well, half of my job is law enforcement. I attended the same police academy that DPS officers attend. In Arizona, anybody with a badge and a gun is a police officer. They all go to the same police academy, have full police authority. I can arrest somebody for DUI if I had to. But obviously my focus is Title 17, which is wildlife law. This is just some old poaching pictures. Poachers will shoot just about anything. And how do we catch poachers? Sometimes we'll use wildlife decoys. Sometimes a lot of other methods. But law enforcement is only about 50% of the job of a wildlife manager. The rest of it falls into other categories such as wildlife management. And I did spend about the last 4 years of my career as a wildlife manager doing something that really recharged my batteries about my position. And I learned a ton along the way, and that was a mountain lion study in the White Tank Mountains on the west end of Phoenix. Wildlife management does have its challenges. That's been described as a serious drinking problem. Okay, back to the lions. There's my daughter that got to catch mountain lions with me, and it was just a fantastic experience. She's popping out of bed at 3:30 in the morning to go check lion traps with me during the summer. And after about 2 weeks of doing that and checking empty traps, she was getting up a little bit later every day until that day. And once we got our first cat, and she got to touch a live mountain lion and put a radio collar on it and turn it loose, she beat me out of bed the rest of the summer. So anyhow, just a handful of pictures of mountain lions that we had trapped in the white tanks. There's my buddy Thori putting a dart in one of them, and a sleepy cat there. And then this cat actually kind of woke back up a little bit. The drug I'm giving it in this picture is a reversal that's supposed to kind of erase the effects of the sedative that we give it. And that cat stood up as I was getting ready to put the needle in her. And I'll tell you what, it got me pretty excited. But she really did just stop and look back at me like, keep your distance. And about a year and a half later, her collar had failed, and we had to recapture her, and that's another picture of her. And I just thought, it reminds me of the Prince John lion in the old Robin Hood movie. I also spent time doing a couple-year study on the mule deer population in the White Tank Mountains. It's a pretty robust mule deer population there, and we wanted to learn a lot more about where they move at certain times of the year. And so we captured a bunch of deer using that thing right there. That's a .308 caliber net gun. It blows out a big net. I don't know, that's probably 15, 20 feet on a side. And basically just entangles them. And then once you get them on the ground, you untangle them out of the net and tie their feet together so they can't get up and run away, put a blindfold on them. It takes about, this guy is incredibly good at it. He could tie up a deer, take a blood sample, untangle the net, get the collar on him, and turn him loose in about 4 minutes. And I was just stunned at how efficient he was at that, but he's done hundreds and hundreds of them. Anyhow, a lot of fun to be able to play with deer like that. Of course, we did a bighorn sheep project in my district the last few years. In the Buckeye Hills, bighorn sheep populations were plummeting, and we weren't sure why, but we didn't like it. So we imported sheep from an adjacent mountain range, turned them loose there with radio collars, and the hope was to be able to follow them around and see if we could determine what was killing off the native sheep to the mountain range. And so there's just a handful of pictures from the sheep capture work that we had done. Helicopters were used, again, shooting net gun out of the helicopter. And it's hard to see, but there's a sheep, I think, on a stretcher with those guys there. There's a better picture of it. We'd capture them one at a time, bring them up, and our vet, of course, was there taking all sorts of biological samples and making sure they were in good health and checking all sorts of things. And then we'd put them in the U-hauler and stage them there, drive them to their new location, open the doors like this, and let them out. And I'll tell you, having your children as part of those experiences completely erases any financial worry you had about a big paycheck. I have brothers that are engineers, and they make quite a bit more money than I do, and they wish they had my job. So we've captured turkeys, even though I don't have turkeys down in my district in the Phoenix area. I got to be a part of turkey captures in other areas of the state. Part of the job as a wildlife manager is habitat manipulation. This is a couple water tanks that are out in the middle of nowhere. You actually have to hike to get to them. There's no road that gets there. And sometimes when they provide a water source for wildlife year-round, and sometimes when it doesn't rain enough, as is often the case in the desert, then you have to call the development branch and have them haul in water via helicopter for this particular catchment site. That little Bambi bucket there hauls, I think, about 110 gallons of water in one scoop, and so it takes a little while to fill up a 1,500-gallon tank. But at any rate, wildlife disease management is certainly part of what we do as wildlife managers, not so much diagnosing, but just recognizing things like this on a deer. I didn't know what it was when I first saw this, and thanks to our stellar staff that we have, it was, it looks terrible, doesn't it? Here's a better picture of that deer, and I thought this has got to be some sort of bad tumor that's going to kill this thing pretty quick, and it turns out it's basically deer warts. Papilloma, it grows and then they fall off, and the only time they really affect the deer is if they're near their eyes where they can't see predators, or near their mouth where they have trouble eating. Other than that, they usually get them, they grow, they look ugly, they fall off, and they survive just fine. So, yeah, we do rescue orphaned little baby stuff too. That is part of the job. Got to spend some time in the office. That's my office. Was. Actually, I have a real office now. And just other cool wildlife stuff. Part of the lion study, we had some cameras set up on catchments. This was actually a friend of mine that sent this to me from down on the Berry Goldwater, south of Gila Bend. But rare to catch a picture of a mountain lion chasing a deer. Obviously, the deer came into the catchment to get a drink. Camera went off as the mountain lion is chasing it. And we did have a picture, for those of you going, oh, there was a picture like 3 minutes later and the lion was back at the water. It didn't catch the deer. So that time. Other cool wildlife stuff. You've probably heard of Mojave rattlesnakes and California king snakes, and people say that the king snakes will eat rattlesnakes. Well, that happened right in front of me and another wildlife manager one day. And it took that California king snake about 4 hours to get it to that point. Because that Mojave rattlesnake was about the same length, I think, as the king snake. The king snake was a little longer, but not much. It was just incredible watching that happen. I threw that one in there just because it's cute. And as a wildlife manager, I really do think it's the best job in the agency. Is where else you get to see stuff like that. I appreciate the time and be happy to answer any of your questions here in a little bit.
Thank you, Mark. I'm sure there's some converts in here now that want to be wildlife managers / game rangers. I would if I was a better biologist. Our next speaker is Christina Jones, and Christina and I work on a lot of projects, but I'm going to give a shameless plug for the Desert Tortoise Adoption Program. If you have an empty space in your yard and a big empty space in your heart and would like to adopt a desert tortoise, please see the Desert Tortoise Queen here after her presentation. So Christina is our Turtles Project Coordinator. Christina?
Thank you. Do I point it there or do I point it there? Okay. Now that we have that taken care of, thanks for the fabulous introduction. And yes, if you're interested in adopting a desert tortoise, I would love to talk to you about that today, in addition to answering any of your other questions. I'm going to go ahead and start my presentation with kind of how I got here, and then I will move into sort of the day-to-day tasks that I get to go through as the state turtle biologist. I started off, I've had a love of wildlife my entire life, especially for reptiles. And so I learned that you could actually get a degree in wildlife, and so I pursued and earned my bachelor's through the University of Arizona, incidentally. Yeah! Thank you. Uh-huh. The better city south of here. Come on. And throughout my undergraduate career, I realized, much as Mike had pointed out, that it's really important to figure out how you want to use your wildlife degree. So I volunteered everywhere. Any graduate student that was looking for assistance on a project, I didn't care what it was, I was there. I volunteered with agencies, the department, BLM. I even went out to zoos because, again, I wasn't sure. I knew that I wanted to focus on wildlife, but I wasn't really sure exactly where I would land. Well, those volunteerships actually landed me some really nice part-time jobs. I was able to do some rattlesnake research through the University of Arizona, a variety of reptile projects through the Arizona Sonora Desert Museum, and then the one that actually kind of paved the way to get me here today was a radiotelemetry study of Sonoran desert tortoises at Saguaro National Park through U.S. Geological Survey. Once I completed my bachelor's, I moved on to pursue a master's degree in wildlife ecology, also through the U of A, and I obtained my funding through a Heritage Grant Fund, which is one of the department's funds, and my project was on upper respiratory tract disease and Sonoran desert tortoises in Arizona. And from there, I was able to become the non-game wildlife biologist in the Turtles Project. And there I work with Audrey Owens. We also have an intern, Alan Bartoli, who together we conduct monitoring and research projects on Arizona's native turtle species, for which we have 7. There we go. Point it that way for the next speakers. Thank you. And my tasks are kind of split. I'm probably about 25% field work, which is sad, but it's still 25%, so that makes me happy, and 75% administrative. And some of my administrative tasks include writing conservation agreements, planning for field work, organizing and analyzing data, writing reports, and delivering a lot of presentations on turtles and the captive desert tortoise care. So I'm going to move on and sort of talk about some of the administrative tasks that I get to do, including working groups and a couple of programs. So as the state lead for turtles in Arizona, I am on a number of working groups, and these working groups include other agencies, organizations, or individuals with a common goal of conserving species and their habitat. So 2 of the main things I'm working on right now are writing conservation agreements for the Sonoran desert tortoise and the Sonoida mud turtle. They're both listed as candidate species under the Endangered Species Act. And once these conservation agreements are implemented, they're designed to reduce or remove threats to these species, maintain or improve populations, and hopefully preclude the need to list them as threatened or endangered. And I'm also was contacted a couple of years ago by a ranching group down in Winkleman, Arizona, who wanted to write a best management practices document that would conserve Sonoran desert tortoises and their habitat on active livestock ranches. And we are happy to say that that's actually out for soft peer review right now, and it should be out for a formal peer review probably by this fall. And as Mike mentioned, I administer the state's tortoise adoption program, which offers an alternative to euthanasia for displaced or unwanted captive tortoises. And our current partners outside of the department currently include the Arizona Sonoran Desert Museum in Tucson and Phoenix Herpetological Society here in Phoenix. So now I'm going to move on to more of our monitoring projects, and I will begin with Sonoran desert tortoises because that is what we spend most of our time on. Sonoran desert tortoises are found throughout, Sonoran desert tortoises in Arizona are south and east of the Colorado River and are found throughout Mojave and Sonoran desert scrub. So with this, I oversee the state's statewide monitoring program, which is comprised of 24 monitoring plots that were established between 1987 and 2002. And with the 25 years of capture-recapture data we've collected so far, we have been able to work with partners at the University of Arizona to analyze the data, and it has shown that the populations of Sonoran desert tortoise in Arizona are actually stable, with annual population estimates ranging between 89 and 96%, which is pretty good for such a long-lived species. And we also have a study site in Tonto National Forest, which is about an hour northeast of Phoenix, where tortoises have been studied by department staff for probably about 20 years. And published papers from this study have included reproduction, habitat use, and survivorship. We continue to monitor this population through annual capture-recapture surveys during the monsoon season. And I see a few faces out here that have probably been out at our study site. And in 2010, we decided to tackle what hadn't really been done before, which is conduct a full-scale juvenile-size Sonoran desert tortoise study. So we have affixed transmitters to 15 animals, and we started tracking them in 2010, and our study is going to run through 2015. And through this study, we're hoping to learn the home range size, habitat use, and survivorship of this size class of juvenile or desert tortoises. And the questions that we get answered will actually go a long way towards helping us define a better management system for this species in Arizona. And the juvenile tortoises are notoriously difficult to find, which is why we capped it at 15. It took us 3 years to get 15 animals, and that was with, I think, ended up with 4,000 volunteer hours. Yeah. So I'm going to shift to ornate box turtles. It's a terrestrial species that's in the grasslands in southeastern Arizona. And this is another species that's notoriously difficult to find, and so we do not have a current monitoring plan. However, there are perceived declines in this population due to habitat loss, road mortality, and illegal collection. So because we cannot spend a significant amount of time down in southeastern Arizona, we decided to launch an ornate box turtle watch program in 2009 that asks the public to record and report data on box turtles that they encounter in Arizona. And through this information, we can actually learn where the box turtles are locally abundant. We can learn more about their behavior and habitat preferences. And this requires a lot of outreach. We've primarily addressed birding groups or folks that spend a lot of time recreating in southeastern Arizona so that they can be our eyes in the field. And we try and show the importance of the species and the project, as well as just encourage public participation. And since we started this, we have received over 200 observations, which is, I'm going to say, 9 times more than we had in the beginning. So that's been pretty exciting. We spend a limited amount of time working on mud turtles. These are sort of semi-aquatic to aquatic species you can find in waterways south of the Mogollon Rim in Arizona. One of them is on the effects of non-native fish removal at a population in Bonita Creek, which is near Safford, Arizona. We're using baited hoop nets and capture-recapture methods, and we go out and visit the site once a year. And then we also work with our partners down at Oregon Pipe Cactus National Monument, which is near the international border, to assist with annual monitoring efforts for the Sonoyta mud turtle, which is a candidate for listing under the Endangered Species Act. And much to my surprise, we spend a lot of time working with non-native species, which majority of are escaped or released pets. And with aquatic non-natives in particular, they outcompete our native mud turtles for basking sites, food, and shelters. So each year we hold a turtle trapping in the moat in front of the Phoenix Zoo. It's a 3-day event where we capture turtles for the 3 days. We mark all of the males and release them at the end of the event and permanently remove the females so that we can reduce breeding and also hopefully reduce the spread into our native waterways. The females are made available for adoption to approved homes. By approved homes, I mean somebody who swears they will never release it. So in the 8 years we have done this, we have captured over 700 turtles, which represents 17 species, only one of which was native. We have captured 2 individual Sonora mud turtles. And thanks to our volunteer assistance, we have over 125 volunteers that usually help us with this 3-day event. We can speak to close to 6,000 zoo visitors about responsible pet ownership and the issues native turtles face when they're trying to compete with a much larger non-native species. As you may have already figured out, we do a lot of outreach with the Turtles Project. We have brochures, we have a poster, we deliver presentations, probably 20 or 30 a year, and we also maintain a multi-page website which has information on native turtles and conservation. Something else I wasn't prepared for with any of my degrees was taking close to 300 phone calls a year from people asking what kind of turtle they found in their neighborhood, or just simply wanting to report observations of turtles that they found in the wild. And so to try and help people figure out what they have found, we created a website that has the 17 most commonly reported species in Arizona, and 3 of them are native, which is kind of sad. So what the public can do is they can go in and they can click on the characteristics such as tail length and continue following the arrows down until they identify their turtle. Once they've identified their turtle, they can click on that and it will pop up a page with information on that species, where it originated, and what they can and cannot do with it. So I'm going to close with a final plug for volunteering. I started off as a volunteer, and now I rely on over 200 volunteers to assist me with my field projects every year. I can offer things like skill sets that would be very valuable for future employers. You can learn to collect data. You can help with surveys, a whole host of outreach. Who knew that that was going to be important? But apparently it is. And you can accomplish so many tasks once you have started, sort of working in the volunteer realm, and really hone in on things that interest you and also things that actually don't interest you at all. So, which was equally as important. I knew I was at the Desert Museum for 10 years volunteering, and I loved the people and I loved the critters, but I knew that I didn't want to be a zookeeper. So I figured that out. So if you're interested in volunteering for the Turtles Project, you can contact me. You'll have my email. I think it's also in your program. And also, if you're interested in just information on Arizona's native turtles, you can contact me or you can visit our website. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. And I think I'd just like to touch on something Christina mentioned. And one is, once again, that beyond your education, you need to reach outside of academia, and you need to get volunteer experience. You need to have internships, paid or unpaid. You just need exposure. You need to find out if this is what you want to do. And those things look good on the resume. As a hiring supervisor, I look at those things, and that helps me in determine who's maybe best suited or who really wants that job. So I'd also like to mention, for those of you in the audience that might be interested in a career in wildlife biology, that Christina said she spends 25% of her time in the field and 75% working on reports and conservation plans. So guys and gals, here's the take-home message. You got to do well. You have to be able to write. You have to be able to read. You have to be able to communicate. You have to be able to work with other people in team situations. Those are all important skills in wildlife conservation and management today. So don't let that fall by the side. So, having said that, I'd like to introduce Scott Sprague, and Scott is a wildlife research biologist. And once again, those of us that are biologists that are just basically desk jockeys now really envy guys like Scott, because he's out in the field much more than I am. So, Scott, thanks for coming down, and appreciate you coming down.
Thanks, Mike. I don't know if I'm actually out in the field all that much more than you these days, but Christina said she spends about 75% of her time in the office. I might be up to 85 or so at this point. I don't know. There are times of the year where I get out a lot. There are other times of the year where I'm here a lot. But just wanted to start off with a minute or two about how I got to where I am. I got my bachelor's degree back east where I grew up. Colgate University. Yes, they did give us some free toothpaste. But after I graduated from there, I really actually was floundering a bit, didn't really know what I wanted to do. I taught for a couple of years, a GED science program back in Maryland. And then I came out here to Arizona in 2002, started working with the Game and Fish Department. And since I've been working for the Game and Fish Department, I actually got my master's degree from NAU. I don't know, somewhere in there between ASU and U of A. I'm not sure where it falls. But since I've been here with Game and Fish, I spent about 7 years as a wildlife technician. And as a tech, I was out in the field probably 75 to 80% of the time. For the last 5 years, I have been a biologist, and that's kind of slowly shifted and flipped almost entirely probably around. So I do spend quite a bit of my time on project coordination, on report writing, lots and lots of meetings. All the projects I'm working on these days are highways projects, so we work very closely with Arizona Department of Transportation, Federal Highways, a lot of other groups and agencies. So that does require quite a bit of meeting time, unfortunately. But there is the trade-off of you're not out there as much, but you actually are having more of an impact on the management of these species that you're really working for. So I did throw in just a few random pictures in here from that I've taken while at work. This is on one of my aerial telemetry flights, which is one of the things that I do still get to do pretty often as part of my job. It's one of the field activities that I really enjoy. So that's actually Upper Lake Mary or Lower Lake Mary, one of them, up south of Flagstaff. And that's, like I said, on a small fixed-wing plane. I'll talk a little bit about telemetry flights down the road here a bit. But so I do work on these highways-related projects. They're connectivity-related projects. We have two really overarching objectives for all these projects. We've got about a dozen or so of these projects statewide in various stages at this point. One of the most important things that we do is recommend improvements to ADOT and to federal highways so that their highways, so that the roads across the state can be better suited to wildlife sustainability, to allowing those animals to get across the roads without getting hit, so that they can get to resources, they can migrate from summer range to winter range, and so they can do a whole host of things that they need to do in order to be out there for the long term. So we do that by collecting roadkill data. Not a lot of fun, a little gross sometimes, but we do stop pretty much and take a note, especially in our target areas, of any time that there's an animal that's been hit, because we want to document that, and it plays a big role in our recommendations for where to focus their ADOT's energies to make these roads better for wildlife. We're also looking at we also want to know where the wildlife that are still alive are moving in relationship to these roads that are in question. And so we do that by putting out GPS collars. The projects I'm working on all work with large ungulates, elk, bighorn sheep, pronghorn, and deer. So to get a collar on deer, we do a helicopter net gun capture. And actually this is a pronghorn capture. But we use a lot of ground observers, and we actually do use a lot of volunteers for these ground observation. For trying to spot the animals. We also use fixed-wing planes to spot the pronghorn from the air, and those get radioed in. Once our observers have some pronghorn in sight, they get radioed into to somebody who's at kind of the staging area. They talk to the helicopter. The helicopter goes after him, chases him with the net gun that Mark showed. That net gun gets fired off right at the animal. They get tangled up. And then this is probably the funnest part of my job. And I don't get to do this very often, once every year, maybe once every 2 years. But not the guy who fires the net gun, but the guy who's riding shotgun in the helicopter is actually called the mugger. Because his job or her job is to jump out of the helicopter after the net is on the animal, run over and tackle the animal, and get its eyes covered, get a blindfold on it, and then start getting the nets off of it so that we can get the collar on, get an ear tag in, take a genetic sample in many cases, and get that animal back on its way. So Mark mentioned some transplants, and moving both deer and sheep around, I think. All the projects that we work on, we're interested on where those resident animals are going across their range. We're not moving anybody, so we do the capture and release all right there in one spot and get it done real quick. We do the same thing for bighorn sheep. We've got a project up near the Hoover Dam that's gotten some international attention for what we've been able to do for the sheep up there with US Highway 93. So that's, again, the helicopter chasing some sheep, firing a net. I don't know if you guys can see it, but that's actually the net right there heading for that sheep. I did not take these pictures. I took some of these pictures, not the really good ones. That's our staff photographer who got these shots. George Andraco, who's got loads and loads of great stuff. And then we put the collars on the bighorn sheep, take a genetic sample, get the ear tag in them, and send them on their way. For elk, the most common method for catching elk is actually these clover traps. We set them at night with alfalfa and salt blocks, and we check them in the morning. This is what we hope to see when we arrive there. And then once they're there, we actually we can't just open the door and run in there and try and get it to sit down while we put a collar on it. So we do have to restrain them. We use ropes or lariats on opposing limbs. We get them kind of splayed out and laying down, tied off to those T-posts that are also actually anchoring that trap down to the ground, because otherwise the elk would probably knock it over and get out. Then we open the door. We get a hood on it, a blindfold on it, and so that we can work it up. We can, again, get the collar on, the ear tag in, and get it back on its way. And when we're ready to do that, you got to time this pretty well. You got to undo all those ropes and pull the blindfold off all in the same time so that you can take off running. And you believe it or not, it's actually strategic which direction you go when you run, because all of our captures are pretty close to the roads, because we're interested in those movements near the roads. So the direction that the trap is aimed and the direction that we run in is all kind of thought out beforehand, because you don't want that animal, especially with a collar on it, getting out of the trap and then running right across the road and getting hit while you're watching it. So it is all thought out, but just as often as not, the animal just sits there as when you run away. But eventually they do all take off and wander about there. And then, so those collars are all out in the field. We do need to check in on them. Most of our collars, we actually have to get those things back in hand in order to get any of the GPS information off of them. 20 or 30 years ago, they were using collars, a lot of telemetry collars, but the only data we were able to get from those was flying around or being out there on the ground and listening for the beeps and marking our maps ourselves. Now most of our collars, all of our collars, have these GPS units on board, so we get 100 times as much data, and it's 10 times as accurate as it was 20 years ago. But if we don't get a lot of these collars back, then that means we don't get any of the data. So we do have to fly them. About every 6 weeks is our schedule. And we use one of these fixed-wing planes. And we're up there. They've got antennas either on the wings or on the belly or both. And we're basically listening to see if that collar is still active. It sounds different if the collar hasn't moved in about 8 hours. And if it hasn't, then we know we should be going out there on the ground to go and pick it up. And sometimes this is pre-planned, because all of our collars are designed to drop off after a certain amount of time, after 2 years. We want to be able to go back out there and get that collar back without having to catch the animal again, because that would be pretty cost prohibitive. And sometimes what we find is a dead animal. If we're there soon enough, we'll actually try and determine a cause. When we're flying only every 6 weeks, that's not the cause of mortality isn't a high priority for our projects, but we do work with some folks, some of our wildlife managers, in fact, especially on our sheep projects, that are very interested in causes of mortality. And we do have some more advanced collars that that will give us an immediate mortality for those. But we get the information back. We actually pass the files off to our GIS specialist, who can make these awesome maps. This is a pretty cool depiction of mule deer movement corridor that nobody had any idea existed. So all these deer were captured just south of Grand Canyon Park, right up here near Tucson, and no one had any clue that they were moving down here to Flagstaff, basically, and back every year. So you get stuff like that, which is really cool. You can see it right away. You get some pretty cool information. This is a current study, actually. This data was pulled off about a month ago from collars. We do have some collars that we can fly over and actually get that data back, but that's a small chunk of them. But these are elk locations along State Route 260, kind of in the Heber Overguard area. And we will eventually be making some recommendations based on this data. But in order to make the recommendations, we actually have to do quite a bit of data processing. So this is just a screenshot of some of the code that I've written to automate the process of doing what it is we need to get done on all of the data that's coming back. We have over 3.5 million locations of our animals on the different, if you combine all of our projects, and we have probably about 500 or so different animals. So if you can imagine for any one study where you've got 100 animals, 100 files, you need to have 3 different output files, and you need to do 20 different steps to get each one of those output files. You need to come up with a way so that you're not doing it all one step at a time, 100 times in a row. So it becomes very key to be able to manipulate software like Excel, which is, this code is basically, I can now push one button in Excel, and if this stuff, when it runs right, it does all 100 files for me, it does all those different 20 different steps, and it gives me all those different output files at the same time. So what we're trying to get done, what we're trying to find, to kind of boil it down for you guys, is one of the most important things is, where are these animals crossing? So we take all those GPS movements, and we look at where those movements intersect the roads, and we break it down by 10th mile sections, and then we basically just do a tally of those 10th mile sections. We end up with a little histogram, and we can tell that this area here is going to be the most important for maybe a crossing structure for the elk. We also then the second big objective for our projects is to find out how all these crossing structures and mitigation components are actually working together. We found that the most important thing is actually the fencing. This is 8-foot elk exclusion fence, and you got to have this fence out there on any one of these projects to keep the animals from getting to the highway and to funnel them to crossing structures such as this underpass on Highway 260 out near Christopher Creek. Or this is actually how the elk see, I think it's the same exact underpass. It might be one just down the road a bit. But you can see that doesn't look like all that much of a barrier to the elk. They can walk right underneath the roadway and not even notice that it's there. This is the a bighorn sheep overpass that I was mentioning before. That's what it looked like. That first shot was what it looks like to drivers. It kind of looks like that bridge to nowhere that people have heard of. But this is what a sheep would see as it's approaching it from the high ground. And this is what it looks like to the sheep as it's crossing over it. This is what it looks like to us. This is a really convoluted and complex. It's not actually meant to be interpreted up on the screen at the moment, but it's just to show you how complex our surveillance systems are. We have very high-tech stuff out there, cameras, DVR, that allows us to watch the sheep not only crossing the, let's see if I can get this to work here. I didn't think of being able to, not having access to the, hey, Ben, can you back it up and just hold the cursor over? Sorry about that. I almost always have access to the laptop. But anyway, we can see not only the animals crossing the overpass, but we can see what they're doing as they approach the overpass. We can assess those behaviors and do it and obtain a real metric, something that's actually measurable to see how well one structure performs in relation to another. There we go. And this is some of the footage that we've gotten. That is about a 1 or 2 day old lamb that's using, and right now they're directly over US Highway 93. So they've managed to cross that highway, and that 1 day old lamb, without having to deal with the traffic, without even knowing that they're walking right over the traffic. And we do have several different views. Like I said, it's a pretty high-tech system, and we've got all kinds of cameras pointed in different directions, so we can get that real measurable success or to see what's working best. And the real metric that we do use is this passage rate. So we're looking at the real measure here is how many times did the animals get across versus how many times did they approach. So we've defined an approach zone. That elk has now approached the underpass, and now it's through it. So right now we have a passage rate of 100%. If we have an elk that comes into the approach area and does not cross, then that's a failed crossing. We have now a passage rate of 50%. And so we're able to compare these crossing structures, and we're actually able to do that with our GPS data on a larger scale for the whole highway, pre-treatment and post-treatment, so we can really tell what's working and what's not working. We do have, as I said, a whole bunch of these projects across the state. Any orange line that you see up here is either a current or past highway project, and it's not actually up to date. There's at least 1 or 2 projects that need to be added to that map. We do have 6 finalized and published ADOT reports, a number of different journal articles and so forth on all this work, and it's gotten national and international attention, and really it's leading the way in a lot of ways on road and wildlife mitigation out there. So what I do spend most of my time doing, I mean, that stuff's really cool. It's awesome to be able to present that data, but as I mentioned, we do spend a lot of our time in the office. I do have a couple of field technicians and biologists that work on our crew that do spend more time in the field than I do. My supervisor spends probably even less time in the field than I do. But we all do get out there to get our hands on the animals, to help capture the elk, the bighorn sheep. And I do get to do a lot of those telemetry flights, which is a lot of fun. Again, here's just another picture I took while I was up on one of those flights. And I just wanted to throw in a slide here about what I think, as a hiring supervisor, what I'm really looking for with different candidates. The kind of the headers here are probably somewhat universal for wildlife technician positions or biologist positions. Some of the lists on there are more specific to the projects that I work on, but you've got to have experience, or that experience is one of the most important things. And as Christina and Mike were both talking about, it's those volunteering opportunities and internships are really, really key. I can't stress it enough. Get out there and volunteer with everybody. I would highly recommend getting on board with your student chapter of the Wildlife Society. It can be a good way to find volunteer opportunities. And if you don't have one at your university or at your school, then think about trying to start one. And I can put you in touch with people from the state chapter if you need some help doing that. Technology is always changing, it's always advancing, and I think that's one case where, youth have the advantage over us more seasoned biologists and older folk. If you've got a good grasp on things that can improve the way we're doing stuff, one of the things I'm excited about over the next few years is to see what sort of smartphone apps we can actually start to use that can improve the way we collect our data. It can streamline things. It can actually expand who's collecting data. We can start to have volunteers and the general public even really start to make real contributions to our data sets. And it can change the way we do things, I think, in the next 5 to 10 years. And outdoor skills, just get out there, do stuff. Especially if you don't have real formal experience, it's important to have on that resume some indication that you know what you're doing outside, because it's very important to a hiring supervisor that they be able to, that they be confident that they can send you out in the field and not have to worry about basically babysitting you out there. So show that you've done, if you're a hunter, a fisher, you go backpacking a lot, find a way to get that across. And do it more, too. The more you get out there, the better off you are. And as Mike mentioned, strong work ethic and cooperation, that's universal for just about any job you're looking for. So that's all I got. Thanks.
Wow, that was inspirational. I think the first of the week I'm going to go to ArizonaStateJobs.gov and look for a real biologist job now. So thanks, Scott. Hey, the take-home message, if you haven't heard it from all three of our panelists so far, is these folks really have an impact on wildlife conservation, wildlife management in the state of Arizona. Just use Scott as example. I am convinced that there have been human lives saved, there's been property damage that's been avoided, and there's been literally thousands of animals that have been saved from road collisions because of the work of Scott and his team and other individuals. So that was inspirational. Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Ann Justice Allen. And Ann is our wildlife health specialist and veterinarian, and one of my responsibilities is to oversee a wildlife rehabilitation center. And without Ann, I don't know how I would do it, but she has a neat job. And if I was a brighter man and had more money to go to school, I would be a veterinarian too. So, Ann, thank you for coming today, and it's all yours.
Thank you, Mike. So yes, as Mike said, I'm the wildlife veterinarian for the department. My official title is wildlife health specialist. And I hope that you'll see from my presentation this morning that I kind of echo pretty much everything that the previous presenters have said. I will start, as the others have, with kind of my background. Surprisingly, I am the daughter of a biologist and ecologist. I actually started doing field work when I was about 10. But I decided at that point in time, there was really no such position in the entire world called a wildlife veterinarian. And I decided at that time, but that while I loved animals and I loved working with wildlife as well as pets, that I did not want to spend my life in academia in the ivory tower, because that's pretty much what biologists did then. This was more than 30 years ago, and biologists and ecologists worked for universities pretty much. And I did not want to spend my life writing papers I wanted to work with animals and do things for animals. So I decided at a very young age to become a veterinarian. And I worked for 20 years as a private practitioner, and working in dogs and cats and cows and horses and sheep and pretty much anything that walked in the door. I was a mixed animal practitioner in rural New Mexico and Utah after spending a few years in Southern California. I went to neither Arizona school. I went to the best school on the West Coast, the University of California, Davis. And I did my undergraduate there as well as my veterinary degree there. And I got involved about 10 years ago with something called disaster medicine, the veterinary medical assistance team. And I decided at that point that I'd had pretty much enough of private practice that I wanted to go ahead and do something more. I wanted to look at disease management and health management on a broader scale. And I specifically wanted to look at the interaction and interface between human health, livestock and poultry health, pet health, and wildlife health. I felt that there was, this was just when one medicine was coming out, I felt that there was a lot of things that needed to be understood there, and that I had some unique background and characteristics, having been raised as an ecologist and biologist, and having had the veterinary aspect as well as the human health aspect. So I went back to school after being out of the, being probably the oldest person in the classroom. I went to Utah State and got a master's degree, and then came and started working for Game and Fish. So first object lesson. First of all, don't think that what you're going to do today or next year, the beginning of your career, the beginning of your professional lifetime, is what you're going to end up doing 20 or 30 years later. Be willing to change, be open to new experiences. And the second thing is, I had no thoughts when I applied for the Game and Fish job that I would possibly get it. I really didn't have very much background in wildlife. I had a great willingness to do whatever it took. So I applied for the position, and lo and behold, I got it. So the thing is don't think that you possibly don't have a chance of getting a position. You will never have that chance if you don't make an application, if you don't give it a try. So you got to sell yourself, you got to be confident, and you got to be willing to work hard. So what does wildlife health mean? What is a wildlife veterinarian? The mission of the Wildlife Health Committee is to promote a better scientific understanding of the causes and consequences of disease in ecosystems, to inform biologists and the public about what those causes and interactions are, to allow wildlife managers to develop a science-based management system that utilizes both understanding of infectious diseases as well as diseases that are non-infectious, nutritional, toxic chemical issues, and to apply this knowledge to enhance the health and conservation of wildlife populations. So it's pretty broad, but we really have an impact. As a wildlife veterinarian, I have an impact on, potentially on, any conservation project the department is interested in undertaking. So what do I do? Like the others that have gone before me, right now I spend a good percentage of my time, probably 75%, working at my desk. Not very exciting at all. I consult with the regions on things like, what do I do if, is this edible? A hunter has this question about, they saw this worm or this spot or this abnormality in the animal they harvested. Is it okay to eat, or is there a problem? What are we going to do? I get calls from the public about dead things in their backyards. I get calls from the public about sick things in their backyards. We do training for the department on how to keep people from getting sick when they're handling injured wildlife or collecting samples. A lot of our biologists, part of their work is to collect tissue samples or to collect scat, and we want to make sure that they're not exposing themselves to something. Some of our biologists go into mines or into caves with bats. We want to make sure they're not going to get sick from something. A lot of our biologists work with rodents, which can carry hantavirus. We want to make sure they're not going to get sick. So we do all these things to inform them how to protect themselves while they can still get their job done. The other thing we do is we do routine disease surveillance. We collect samples from hunter-harvested elk and deer for chronic wasting disease surveillance. We also collect samples from any captured animals. So sometimes with Scott's highways projects, we'll go out and help collect blood samples when we're going to do a translocation, move sheep from point A to point B. We'll collect those samples to determine the health status of the populations that are the source populations, and so that we have an idea down the road, if that animal dies, is there something that changed about their system? And we also investigate just general wildlife mortality events. So a big part of it is animal handling. We try and make sure that the animals are handled in a safe and humane manner, something that's going to be successful in the long run. The better we handle the animals when we're catching them and moving them, the more successful we will be. There's a lot of expense that goes into net gunning from a helicopter, bighorn sheep, and we want to make sure that every animal that we catch and take to a new location survives and reproduces. That's the objective of a translocation, is to augment the population and establish a new breeding population. So if we're not very careful about what we do, then we potentially end up just throwing money down the drain. We also want to make sure those animals are healthy. So we do sample collection and treatment. The animal on the bottom right there has something called contagious eczema. This is a viral infection of sheep and goats, and it was brought to our bighorn sheep from domestic sheep and goats. And we now have it in many of our populations around the state. Luckily, this virus is not really that detrimental to bighorn sheep. It causes the scabbing and crusting that you see on the muzzle in this animal, but it generally does not cause mortality for the most part. Occasionally it will, but it's not a population-limiting infection. And then this is the desk work that we do. So we take all the information that we collect on the sheep, the level of antibodies and exposure to disease, and we monitor it and we compare it from one population to another. So we know that, for instance, our bighorn sheep in Canyon Lake and Apache Lake, around there, they have had no exposure to an organism that has been recognized as causing pneumonia in bighorn sheep. They do, however, have exposure to something called blue tongue virus and hemorrhagic disease virus, which are two viruses that are spread by Culicoides midges. Whereas if we look at our sheep in the southwestern corner of the state, they do have exposure to the pneumonia organism, but they do not have exposure to the blue tongue EHD organism. So we know that if we were to pick sheep up and move them across the state one direction or the other, we could potentially have some disease problems, either with mixing of populations with a contagious disease like pneumonia, or just not having protection against a disease that's present in what's called a vector species. The Culicoides midges are vectors. We can't control what they do. It's not a directly contagious disease, but we might want to consider vaccinating any sheep that we're moving from one side of the state to another. And then training. So in order to use the net guns and in order to use dart guns that shoot drugs out, we make sure that all of our officers and field personnel have the proper training to do that. This is a big part of what I do, is minimizing liability and improving safety through the department with handling these sorts of things. So these instruments and are not without risk and danger. The net guns, as Mark said, that those are charged with 4 very large charges, and they come out at a very high rate of speed. The weights on the end of the nets, in order to get them to fly out and open up, weigh about half a pound each. And if they were to hit a person, they could cause some serious damage. And if they hit an animal the wrong way, they can cause serious damage and even death. So we may try and make sure that everybody has the training to use those properly. The darts and darts guns that we use to tranquilize problem animals, whether it's a bear or if we're doing a research project and we're darting elk, the dart guns, the darts are weapons, and the drugs that we use could be lethal to a person because the wildlife take a very high concentration of drugs in order to get them to lie down and do it safely. So we have special training programs for all that. And that's pretty much short and sweet of what I do. This is a picture of me with a Sonoran pronghorn, which is an endangered species. We have a captive breeding pen in Ajo, and we've just set up a second one in Kofa. And I'm preparing to reverse the anesthetic on this animal. So this is the 25% of field work that we get to do sometimes. I didn't show pictures of it, but the other part of my, quote, field work is doing necropsies on wildlife animals to determine cause of death and determine if there's any infectious disease toxins. We've identified a new virus here in the state called pigeon paramyxovirus. We are finishing up a project on that now, and it hopefully will be written up and in publication in another year or so. And I've worked with, you saw the bald eagle story in the beginning. We worked on that, and we'll be writing that up. There's a first identified mortality event over multiple years in eagles due to ticks. So it's a lot of both field work, but it's really important too. So this is the next thing. It's great to go out there and work with the animals, and it's great to be able to handle them and conserve them, but we need to share all that information. So we have to be aware that it really doesn't mean anything unless we can get it out there, record it, share it with people, document it, and demonstrate what we're doing. So you do have to have those skills as well, writing, how to do research, and how to communicate. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. Hey, I forgot to mention, hey, Ben is in the back. Ben also gave up his Saturday to be here. Ben's doing all the, thanks, Ben, for doing all the PowerPoints and the sound, and what dedicated staff we have at Arizona Game and Fish to come in on a Saturday. Hey, Ann made 4 points that I heard bits and pieces of this from all of our presenters thus far, and I just want to re-communicate these. First of all, remember your first job in biology won't be your last job typically. So that means if you're interested in working with African lions in the savannah, you're not going to get that job probably the first time out. You may have to take a job as a fish biologist or a pronghorn technician or something even worse, maybe a tortoise biologist. Just kidding. Determination is very important to get that job. Obviously, to get a career in biology is a competitive field, just like every other job field. So you have to have that determination. You have to have enthusiasm, and you have to have a positive attitude. You're going to work for a long time in your life, so make sure that the job you select is the job that you love. Our last speaker, our last panelist is Eric Proctor, and Eric is one technique I've always used as a manager is surround yourself with good people so you can be a slacker, and that's what I've done with Eric. And so Eric and I actually we put this together. We put this program together as partners. And so, Eric, thank you. And he's going to speak. Eric is our wildlife education coordinator. And so this is a field that some of you typically may not consider as wildlife biologists, but you can have a huge impact on the minds of America. So, Eric, it's all yours, bud.
And I don't have a PowerPoint. I'm just going to talk to you guys, if that's okay. I will say that hopefully what you've gotten out of the messages that most of these people had up here is the role that education and outreach can play. So I actually have the most important job in the department. No. I just put that out. It is one that's often forgotten about a little bit, and one that we wanted to kind of put in here a little bit, especially for those of you that may have been watching this and realizing that all that stuff sounds really cool, but I don't know if I'm ready to do all of that, or I'm in a different position, or maybe the science just isn't, I'm not as strong in the science or the math or the technology or those pieces that are necessary. And education can play a different role. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my background and how I got here and what I do, but I'm not going to spend a ton of time because we want to make sure we get to some of the questions that you guys had submitted earlier. I went to the University of Arizona. Go Cats. Woohoo! And as I got a degree in ecology, and I thought I was going to be a biologist or something out in the field. And that's kind of what I entered into. But as I started going through my educational career, I started to realize for whatever reason that really wasn't for me anymore. But I had already, literally I was making this decision like 2 weeks before graduation. And so I was kind of deep in a little bit and trying to figure out what am I going to do with this. And I started thinking about what I had been doing getting up there and the things that I had enjoyed. And what I'd realized is not really knowing, I had no intention of going into education. It wasn't what I did. But when I looked at the experiences that I had done some work at the Phoenix Zoo. I had done some work at the Arizona Sonoran Desert Museum. They had all centered around education, that piece. And I found that, that was kind of cool. I didn't really like my science education growing up when I was in high school. It frustrated me. I loved science, but I didn't necessarily like the way it was presented to me. And so it became a unique opportunity for me to look and say, you know what, there are better ways to do this. And so I decided 2 weeks before graduation that, you know what, I'm going to finish my degree out and then I'm going to see what opportunities may exist in education. It just so happened that I think maybe even that same day, I got a call from a professor at U of A. She must have been reading my mind or whatever and said, hey, we've got this new master's program at U of A that we're looking to take people that have science backgrounds and put them into the classroom. And you can get a master's degree and your teaching certificate at the same time. So I started with that program, went through it. I began it. I actually ended up having to transfer back up here, so I actually ended up with my master's at ASU as well. So I got both of them in there, but still a wildcat at heart. So. But I ended up going into teaching and actually took a full-time teaching position. I taught for about 5 years teaching middle school science. And I was one of those, like I said before, I didn't think I could be a teacher. It was never on my radar. And so to get with even what Ann was saying about how things change and opportunities come up and sometimes don't be afraid. I did that for about 5 years while I was teaching to supplement my income because you're not going to make a lot of money doing that. I still did science education, so I was working. I went back to the Phoenix Zoo and did some outreach with the Phoenix Zoo. I was working at the Challenger Space Center. I was trying to pick up all these different experiences because I loved science education and I just wasn't sure where it was going to take me, and I wasn't sure if I was going to be in the classroom the whole time. And then I was in my 5th year of teaching, and I was getting ready to start looking for summer opportunities because as a teacher I was always looking for what I could do over the summer, and I always wanted to be back in the lab, so I was looking for lab opportunities that, there's a lot of programs out there where they bring teachers into research labs and stuff like that, and I just happened on the Game and Fish website, and I was like, I wonder if they have any summer internships for teachers, and I came across the job, and I was like, I thought I don't have a chance at this at all, but I'm going to put in and just see what happens. And I put in, and slowly I started going through the process. I got to the first interview, the second interview. I'm like, hey, this might actually become a reality. I'm not sure I'm ready to leave the classroom. But I went through the process. I had to do, I guess, a little bit of soul searching and figuring out, is this what I want to do if this becomes a reality? And sure enough, it did. And 9 years later, I'm still here basically doing wildlife education. And in my position now, I work primarily behind the scenes. I work with teachers, looking at trying to bring all the cool stuff that you've seen into the classroom in the best way that I can. Because I do believe that when you look at science education, when you look at what's going on in high school and stuff like that, there's a lot of emphasis on the STEM fields, and there's biotech is out there, and physics is out there, and chemistry, and all the stuff is out there. I think wildlife biology often sort of gets pushed to the side a little bit. And so I've been really trying to improve what that looks like in the classroom. That's why I've really liked programs like Scott's Highways program, because It integrates the technology, it integrates the engineering, it integrates the math that all these schools are looking for, but it does it from the wildlife focus. So taking these projects. So I do get to go out in the field occasionally. I'm probably even less than any of these people, but I bug them sometimes. I'm on the phone with them saying, hey, you got a project that I can come out, maybe lucky, bring a few people with me as well, but at least going out, trying to help them. I do have a biology background, so I can at least, I'm not a complete dunce when I get out there in the field. I can sort of help out. But my role out there is to sort of get that inspiration to find ways that I can bring that back into the classroom. Maybe not get the kids out there, but can I bring the experience or what we're doing at Game and Fish out into the classroom? So I work with teachers a lot on that. I do curriculum development. That's largely why I don't have pictures, because you didn't want to see me sitting at my desk writing a lesson plan. And I'm just here sort of to talk about it. And then I do some other programs. I run some other programs where we work on trying to get kids out in nature as well and working on that a little bit. So I'm playing sort of the introductory role, building the awareness in the community and trying to get that, because you can't get to the point where you want to love and protect wildlife unless you can appreciate it. So we're trying to lay that groundwork for people so that then we can hopefully build new biologists that will come into the field for us. So that's a very, very quick opportunity of what I do, but I wanted to really present it to show you that, think outside the box a little bit when you're looking at what you might do. As Ann said, take the opportunities that come. Don't be afraid to try something, but think that, hey, I really like teaching, but I also like wildlife. You don't necessarily have to sacrifice one or the other. If you're creative, you can sometimes find ways to merge those two opportunities together. And it's not just teaching. We have jobs all over the place. I think Scott mentioned we have a photographer. We run our own magazines, so we have editors and writers. We have our own TV crew, which Ben works with, to put all the media together. So you don't necessarily have to sacrifice what you might consider your hobbies and your career practical life. There are ways to merge it if you're creative and you work hard and you are persistent in trying to get those positions. So I think that's all that I'm going to focus on, because I want to get to some questions that you guys had and submitted. Because of time constraints, we're not really going to open it up to the questions at this point. But remember, all the panelists are going to be available right next door to us in about 5 or 10 minutes, where you can go ask some specific questions. But I do have some questions that many of you guys submitted ahead of time, and they're more general interest. So what if I could ask if the rest of you guys can come up here? Because we have the microphone and we are actually webcasting this, so some people are actually watching it, and it's being recorded so that we can hopefully put it on the web as well.
Tell us that now.
Yeah. So when they answer, I'm going to have them actually come up to the microphone. And not everybody has to answer every question. I'm just going to ask some general questions, and then whoever wants to. And some of them might have been answered a little bit, but I'm going to go through some of them here. I'm going to start with a very simple one that came through. And you might have answered it, but if you can clarify it for us in here. Why did you choose to take the job with Game and Fish? What was it that drew you into Arizona Game and Fish? Anybody want to take a stab?
They hired me. I mentioned real quickly that I taught for a couple of years before coming out and starting with the department. At that point, I applied to probably 50-plus different 450 or more wildlife positions across the country, some maybe outside the country. I don't know. I was willing to go anywhere, do anything. I got maybe 2 or 3, somewhat offers, but Game and Fish, actually, they happened to be desperate at the time because they were hiring a big crew, and so it was definitely the best setup. So that's why I decided to come here, because they were willing to take me.
So actually, as I mentioned, I really didn't have any inkling that I might end up working for a Game and Fish agency, but it was my dream job in reality, because it's the best of a lot of worlds. I get to do some wildlife management and hands-on patient management. I get to do necropsies and investigations so that I'm looking for cause of death. I'm looking at that ever-important public health, wildlife health, and livestock health interface that I so much was interested in when I started my master's degree. So it was actually just lucky. And if I hadn't ended up working for Game and Fish, I probably would have started looking for for Arizona Game and Fish, I probably would have started looking at other wildlife management agencies, because I was already a member of the Wildlife Disease Association, which, if you're interested in diseases, veterinary medicine, and wildlife, I would strongly recommend you as a student join that association. And as Scott said about the Wildlife Society, if you don't have a chapter on your university campus, we can get you a chapter on your university campus. We just need a sponsor and a group of students that are interested. So that's my little plug for the Wildlife Disease Association.
So I have a couple more that I think are important that I want to get to, and it ties in a little bit with what Ann said about working for a wildlife management agency. In your opinion, and some of you might have had both this experience, but how is working for like a government agency like Game and Fish different than what you might experience in the private sector? Anyone want to take a stab?
I jumped right in.
So then let's change a little bit. What are some of the challenges that you know you've experienced in the government that maybe you don't, that you wouldn't, some roadblocks or barriers that you wouldn't have if you were working in the private sector? So we can understand it is a different monster, kind of. Go for it.
So I have worked both in the private sector, although in a slightly different field, and also for a state agency. When you're working for the private sector, you have a much smaller group of people that you're dealing with usually. You have probably fewer constraints on what you can do, when, and how. Whereas working for a governmental agency, there's a lot of state rules. How you can spend your money, how you have to order your supplies, what you can and cannot do out in public, because we represent, even when we are not wearing our Game and Fish hats, so to speak, we are still representing the state of Arizona. And some of us do it, I think, very, very well. And I hope we all should serve as a good example of how people should behave when they represent a state government agency. And sure you're aware, there are people that are not, because of their names in the headline. None of them, thank God, work for Game and Fish. But those rules are in place for a good reason. They're usually there for safety and fairness and that sort of thing. What else? The benefits are great. One of the reasons that I am glad I'm working for a state agency are the health and retirement benefits. Are they such that they make up for the fact that I probably make only, I wouldn't say half, but probably 75% of what some of my colleagues make, most of my colleagues make? Yeah, I think they do, because that's the choice I made. But certainly, I'm not making a gazillion dollars. So that's another thing, is a lot of times when you work for a state or federal government agency, while your employment's a little bit more insured, it's certainly not going to make you tons of money. That's about all I can come up with at the moment.
Jump in there real quick. So the only other thing that Ann didn't mention is that I do feel like working for an agency, you ideally, and most of the time it's true, you do have a more kind of just general science approach, and you're out there to do the best possible science out there. There are times when, if you're working for a private company, you basically have a client and they have an objective. And most of the folks out there that are doing that work are good scientists as well. But there's additional pressures on finding certain results that can weigh on someone from that area. We're not free of that here in an agency. In fact, my branch is we have clients. The wildlife contracts branch actually is funded from people outside of the department. It's other people giving us money to do stuff. But I still feel like we have that cushion of being a state agency where it's very clear there's a mandate for the best possible science. So it's pretty nice to have that.
As reluctant as everyone seemed to answer that at first, now we're all jumping in. I'm not sure what's going on, but the thought occurred to me listening, and that's just maybe one of the stark contrasts to the public service and private sector, is the public trust doctrine, something that we do as an agency. We're managing wildlife on behalf of the public, and that's an enormous responsibility that I think all of my colleagues here at Game and Fish take very, very seriously. And that contrasts with the private sector. There's probably some circumstances that does occur in, but an awful lot of private sector jobs, and I've never had one, involve making a profit. And profit isn't what our department is about. Obviously, we're about managing wildlife in perpetuity for future generations. So that's pretty meaningful as a legacy, I think, when you're done with your career, if you've made a difference that will last well beyond your lifetime. And just managing in the public trust doctrine is something that's pretty important, I think.
We'll do one more question that I think is kind of important. It's somewhat complicated, but I think the answers may be somewhat simple. And Scott had touched on this a little bit when he looked at what his ideal candidate would look like, in particular looking at technology and how technology changes. We have high school and college kids here that are looking at, entering the workforce 5 or 10 years from now. So in what you see going on now in wildlife management, what sort of job trends do you see over the next 5 to 10 years? Where is the growth occurring? What should they be preparing for? Is it going to be in the private sector? Is it going to be public sector? Are there certain species they should be focused? Whatever you sort of see is how they can best be ready so when they enter 5 or 10 years from now.
I think you have to go.
Yay, Christina. I think that there are, at least with non-game, there appears to be sort of a trend towards possibly bringing in more and more biological technicians. And so those would be pretty much, right out of a bachelor's degree, coming in with a skill set to go ahead and follow through on tasks that have already been assigned. So going out and conducting the field work for those of us who get to write about it. And so, again, going out and in addition to having the technical skills, especially GIS, I don't know that anybody in the department, at least in the wildlife portion, are able to function with their job without understanding GIS, how to map things, how to analyze the data, so that we can actually make the management recommendations that we do. And so field work, going out and getting experience in the field, and also knowing what to do with it once you bring it back to your desk, I think are going to be a couple of things that regardless of the trend of the future, are going to be a mainstay.
Yeah, I think GIS is huge. Probably not every biologist right now has a handle on it, but in the next 5 years, I expect that will be the case. We still have a whole group in the department that focuses just on doing GIS analysis, but really everything that we do has this geospatial, this space component to it, and so it really helps to have a grasp on that yourself. The other thing is that will never go away. It will change form. Is data management, and that's so having a handle on things like software like Excel and Access, and statistical programs as well. But those things, if you really know your way around that, you can actually make yourself stand out and be that good of a candidate by being able to manipulate that stuff and really know it well, and always be looking for the next new technology that's coming about. As far as species go, I think the only thing I would think of is look at what's important now, what might be important, like candidate species. I think there's some potential there for a lot of potential for funding to look at, especially keeping those candidate species from becoming listed on endangered or as endangered or threatened. And then the last thing I would mention is climate change. We're already shifting towards that sort of stuff, but very little biology will be able to be done well and effectively in the next 15 years without accounting for climate change. So there's going to be a lot of funding available for studies that touch not just on climate change, but how does climate change affect transportation work? How does it affect, the tortoise work and everything that we do? So those are things I'd stay on top of.
I think everybody's pretty much hit some of the things I was thinking about, but a couple of items that they didn't hit is I think that what we're going to see in the future is we're going to see a greater use of potentially of drone technology. Nobody said that, but right now we use a lot of fixed wing and even helicopter for flights for surveys and also for picking up the GPS signals and doing some downloading that way. I think we're going to see some changes there. The other thing is modeling. We already use quite a bit of both stochastic type modeling as well as geospatial modeling. And I think the modeling programs are getting much more complex, and you're going to see more and more of that. And they're going to be hopefully somewhat user friendly, but people that have an understanding of how to take a biological system and model it within a computer and actually have it be very realistic, and they can be extremely complex. So it would be taking some of the same skill sets that are used in making games and taking it into a simulation model for an ecosystem. So I think that's another thing. We're already using a lot of that in both wildlife disease, but also in population modeling and genetic modeling, and you just name it.
All right, I will just comment real fast, and then we're gonna dismiss you and let you guys go. In fact, if you guys want to go out and you can get set and get ready to go. I can't probably emphasize enough the GIS that's already been pointed out. It's one of the things that I try to teach about. If you don't know what it is, I encourage you to start looking at it and looking at you can't. I don't think you can go wrong over the next 10 or 20 years with GIS in whatever you decide to do, even if you don't go into wildlife. I don't believe there is much of any career out there now that does not have GIS integrated into it on some level. Whether or not you're physically using it or it's behind the scenes, it is extremely important. So consider that. I think the drones is going to be another big one as well. All the state legislatures now are all looking at rules associated with drones and how are we going to be using it in the government sector beyond what you hear about at the national level, but how can local agencies use it, and what is the rules associated with that. So drones are going to be huge as well. With that, that concludes the first portion of it. I know we're running a little bit late, but you should still have plenty of time. What we're going to be doing here is, as we just dismissed the panelists and I'll go as well, they're in the next room. So what you're going to do is in a few minutes here, there's going to be groups of people. So our HR staff is going to be coming up here. They'll be able to talk to you about college programs that we accept, the internship, all those different types of things, and on the hiring side of it. Right in the hallway behind us, we're going to have ASU, and if you want to, do you want to head out there? Or? Okay, ASU is going to be out there, and Scottsdale Community College is set up to talk about some of the programs they have to offer. And then in the entryway, there's a couple volunteer groups to talk about that you can talk about. And then in the room that's right next to us, all the panelists are going to be sort of standing around, and you can certainly, talk to them individually one-on-one. There's no formal presentations at this point. It's all just individual talk. Go talk to people, get your questions answered. And then on your way out, what I would ask you to do is one more thing is we at the info desk where you got your where you got the agendas for today, there's some index cards. They're blank index cards. We want your feedback. So anything that you can provide. There's no specific questions, but if you can tell us what we did right today, what you would like to see if we were to offer this in the future, those types of things. And then there's a green box you can put it in. When you do that, we've got a small little prize. You can get one of our magazines that we publish. We've got a copy of that you can take with you as well. There's also e-news cards if you want to get on our listservs to get updates on a variety of different information. You can fill that out. If you do, you can throw that in the green box as well. But if you fill out one of the survey cards, just give us some comments. There's no questions. What we did, what would you like to see? Go ahead and put it in the green box and we'll give you a magazine. Are there any questions about that? Right. There are restrooms out by where the Antelope Foundation is as well, if you need that, and drinking fountain. With that, thank you guys for coming. We appreciate everything that you guys have done, the sacrifices you guys have made to be here on a Saturday as well. So thank you.